we're going to be solving the motivation puzzle. If you're a human, you are familiar with feeling frustrated and exhausted and confused by that constant push and pull of trying to stay steady with your health behaviors. Wanting to be healthy, but then also wanting to indulge, to eat whatever you want and have, just enjoy all the good pleasures in life. Then also wanting to, get out there and be active and healthy and strong and do all that. So that indulging seems to always creep in and take over again. It's like no matter how much momentum you might seem to have, that desire is there. So balancing these tensions is really the key to major long-term growth and health and staying with these things long term. The fact is that you're always going to want to do both, be healthy and to indulge. So understanding gives you power, right? And that's what we want to do here. We want to understand these things so that we have some power over them. What gets you motivated? What keeps you in the game? Why is it so difficult to do what is good for you instead of what feels good? That's a question that plagues a lot of us, right? Why is it that it's so difficult? Let me give you the answer actually straight up. Now, the answer is because your unconscious energies are always directed towards nagging needs, not wants. Your energies are always going to go towards the must-haves and can't-stands and never to the would-be goods. Right? It's just because something would be good is not enough to motivate you to put all of your energies and your enthusiasm behind it and get momentum behind, this thing would be good. We are always directed towards things that we are nagging us and we need them. It's I must have or I cannot stand this, right? So would be good is not enough, right? It has to be nagging at you. This is the thing. I did say unconscious, right? So therefore it's not conscious, right? So you're not actually automatically aware of it. Things that are nagging at you, you're not actually sure a lot of the time what it is. We're not aware of it. It's lurking in the subconscious, and it's these confusing, hang-ups we have and all these different things. What we want to do is become aware of these things. So once we understand them, we can have awareness around them. But you can't become aware of something you don't know, right? So that's why we start with understanding it. Therefore, we can become aware of it afterwards. And a lot of it has to do with these subconscious strategies for getting the things that we need. Where our motivation comes from is these needs, these underlying needs. So where we're going to start this discussion of needs, right, is in this idea of the hierarchy of needs. What we want to go through is what is the hierarchy at all, right? And then some interesting distinctions around it, and then how to apply these ideas. Basically, the idea is that we are programmed unconsciously to be driven towards fulfilling what is perceived as lacking of these needs every waking moment. You can set all the goals you want in life, but if a need comes knocking, then all your goals are going to take a back seat. Again, the more you understand how this works and align yourself with your needs, you're going to be pulled towards your goals naturally. So rather than setting goals misaligned with your needs and having to push and fight yourself, then you'll naturally be pulled towards it, like I said. If you're pushing yourself, you're going to lose. It's just no one has ever just pushed themselves to be doing something they don't want to do, genuinely, truly don't want to do, and then actually one. There are many different types of these models for the needs, right? So I don't really think dwelling on the specifics of these needs helps. It's more the philosophy of it that I think has the most value. And obviously the most famous one is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And there are other models of different organizations around those needs that are also really good and make a lot of sense. So, but I think the specifics aren't so much as important as the actual the concept of a hierarchy. And just the fact is they all kind of sit in these broad categories of like physical, emotional, and spiritual needs, right? And obviously your physical is things like your food and home, safety. Emotional is the self-esteem, positive connection to others. Spiritual needs, things like personal development, growing into all of what you could be and do and have and contribute, and then sort of transcending above and beyond yourself. But this is a hierarchy because at the baser levels they're louder. When they're unsatisfied, at the lower level, they take over fully and completely. They run to the front of the room and scream, demanding attention. For example, right, if you haven't eaten for a few days, no other needs are important. Or if you lost your home, that becomes your top priority. No matter how you feel or what your situation is, that would just dominate your life until you find yourself another home, right? And on the emotional level, if you're feeling threatened or you don't feel safe or secure within yourself, or feel emotionally connected to other people that are important in your life, committing yourself to a higher cause and being all you can be, it just doesn't feel right until you have those emotional needs met. So there's a hierarchy in the sense that if the lower needs are not met, then the higher needs seem irrelevant. You just can't commit the same level of energy to it because you need those lower needs met first. So that's why the hierarchy idea is useful, right? This is a massive insight I had about weight loss and achieving the body that you want, that it's actually at a higher level of the hierarchy. Having the best body that you possibly could have is an act of personal development, right? It's actually fulfilling a spiritual need, which is actually only something you can give energy to if you have your lower level needs met in a meaningful enough way that you can focus yourself into the project of becoming all you can be physically, right? So obviously plenty of people don't really have all of their lower level needs met, and yet they start working on their body. It's often being done to fulfill these lower level needs. It can be quite an issue because, say in the case of the weight loss, if they're using it to repair their self-esteem, or to be able to connect with others or fix a physical problem, as soon as those things kind of start to fix themselves, you start to get a better response from people, you're in a better mood, you have more self-esteem, then all of a sudden your motivation just dries up. And then you kind of get stuck in this yo-yo effect where you sort of, as soon as you start to feel a little bit better, then you're not motivated anymore. It's not motivated by that higher level project, right? And so this is why motivation comes and goes so easily when it's just being done to fulfill a lower level need, right? So we'll get a bit more into that later. But I just want to go through a few points that I think are really insightful about this model. To feel fulfilled, right, all the categories don't need to be fully full, but they must be acceptably full. Just sufficiently full. So it's not like you have to have them fully and completely satisfied and then move on. Right? They're not like levels to be completed and then moved on from. They require ongoing maintenance. Acceptability is a personal thing. How much a need needs to be satisfied is it depends on your history and your personality and your environment. Different people require different amounts of each need to be met, and different needs pop up and down based on what's going on in our lives, and what's going on in the world around us, so keeping them full is like a constant game of whack-a-mole, right? It's not one and done. It changes throughout our whole lifetime. They evolve and change in your 10s and your 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s. It's like we need different things to be satisfied in those stages of life. So, we need to keep growing and evolving in our ability and capabilities to meet them, right? And to recognize them too, So you might have all your needs met at a particular stage in life, but then in the next stage, you kind of find yourself with all your needs unmet, all your emotional and your physical needs, they're different now. And that's why our motivations constantly change too, because at a particular stage, all these, I have them meaningfully met, but then things change, and then now I need them met in a different way. Now, I want to narrow in on a particular distinction that really makes a difference, that explains so much about why weight loss attempts either fizzle out or become sustainable transformations. And this is the difference between deficiency and growth needs. This distinction reminds me of the concept in psychology of below the line versus above the line. Right, so the line represents nothing bad, nothing good. So below is sort of dysfunctional, and the goal is to sort of get to neutral, right? But above that line is sort of flourishing, and the goal is just limitless, right? So becoming everything that you could be. Deficiency needs sort of the physical and the emotional. It's food, water, shelter, safety, social connection, and recognition. All right, the growth needs. The spiritual needs, like living to the fullest, becoming all that you can be, fulfilling your potential. When a deficiency need is lacking, Life takes on an anxious, tense quality that dominates your thinking and focus and energy until the need is addressed, right? But when a growth need is unfulfilled, life kind of feels empty and meaningless, and you get burnout very quickly doing whatever you do. So as discussed earlier with the hierarchy, that deficiency needs, though, they nag a lot louder. And that makes a lot of sense evolutionarily, right? Because the consequences are a lot worse when they're not met. If you don't have food or roof over your head, you're in real potential physical harm and danger. If you don't have friends or social status, you risk living in a damaging social isolation. Growth will always take the back seat because the consequences are not fatal or even obviously harmful. Right? You just miss out on that good thing. Its negative consequences are subtle, but I would argue that the consequences are equally impactful. It has a deep and profound effect on everything in someone's life, right? But it's just a subtle background noise, right? It's easy to ignore. It's easy to distract yourself from, right? So you can reach the end of your life and never end up attending to your growth needs. The growth needs, they're low energy, they're passive, right? They're willing to give up resources for other needs that are more demanding. If someone is operating on a growth need project and it has become high energy, being driven by anxious or intense energy, you can tell that it's now descended into a deficiency and it's being done to fill a lack. Growth is a stoic and stable energy, right? It looks more like peace and not like happiness. It's more like acceptance and not despair. Just a stable, stoic states. Growth is a deeper, more profound spiritual place to be. So again, when you know these things, you can do your best to direct yourself towards that, direct your energies towards the growth mindset. Without understanding this stuff, the subconscious mind just naturally energizes and focuses around deficiency needs. Again, talking about that awareness about how powerful that is, and how and the point of this whole video, right, is to be able to understand these things. That's where we go through what the qualities of these things look like, so you can start to notice them and bring awareness to them. And then when you have awareness around them, you can direct yourself towards them, because if you don't, then again, there is a natural magnetic pull towards only focusing on deficiency needs, right? If you're not being conscious and intentional, you're never going to go to those growth needs, because again, the growth needs, they're subtle, they're silent, they whisper, they're not going ever demand that you do anything about them. But like we've just been through, it's going to potentially have you in a place of despair. What the hell did I do with myself in my life, right? What a waste. Because they will never demand that you do anything about them. This is the thing, right? Being able to direct your energies towards growth needs, it requires that knowledge and wisdom. So what does wisdom look like? Right? It's emotional regulation. Right? It's the capacity to stay centered in the midst of emotional states. Right? It's perspective taking, seeing beyond your immediate interests and impulses. Right? It's alignment with reality, understanding and acceptance of what is. The deeper patterns of life, suffering, and human nature, right? Rather than the fantasies of what it should be like. Wisdom is knowing that we control almost nothing, and yet we influence almost everything. So seeking to understand and influence rather than to dominate and control. Knowing that you always fall short of perfection and stumble along the way, but you always do your best. Deficiency needs are a bottomless pit that you need constant refilling and will pop up and disturb you continually, but they can be navigated with wisdom. So without understanding these distinctions, we just do whatever we are instinctively driven to do, right? Which means just whatever feels good at the time, right? Or whatever feels right at the time, right? Which is what creates the whole mess in the first place. When you don't know what these dysfunctional patterns look like, you can't bring any awareness to them, right? So understanding the dysfunctional pattern, understanding the healthy pattern, waking up in the moment and with awareness to it happening in the moment, and then making some intention towards the healthy one, right? Awareness, knowledge, wisdom. This is what we're exploring here. This is what we're building here in this video right now, okay? The deficiency needs, their emotional tone or psychological flavor is defined by anxiety, insecurity, desperation. I don't want to be fat anymore. I'm scared of getting diabetes, right? I hate the way I look in those photos. Once achieved is the feeling of relief and restoration, right? And then once the need is met, the motivation subsides, right? So, for example, when you get hungry, then you're satisfied and the drive disappears. The behavioral patterns of this also manifest as things like extreme diets, over-exercising, punishing routines. So, white knuckling through temptation, right? Quick fixes, all or nothing thinking. Right? And the outcome in the end is that your motivation disappears once the pain is eased. You lose a few kilos or you get a compliment, and then you risk rebound. Yeah, and then because the drive was to keep going was removed, right? So you don't grow into that new way of being. The growth needs, though, the emotional tone, the psychological flavor is joy, curiosity, fulfillment, exploration, expression, inspiration, awe. Right? It's unnecessary, but it's deeply satisfying. The kind of things you'll find yourself thinking and saying, I want to see what my body is capable of. I love the feeling of strength and energy. Taking care of myself lets me live fully and serve others better. And the outcome is that the behaviors become self-reinforcing. You do more, you want to do more. Right? And the motivation deepens as you practice more and more. Your health becomes an identity rather than a chore. So to say more about the deficiency needs, this is unfortunately really the only mode that people ever seem to access motivation and achieve anything, right? Waiting until things are smashing their door down and demanding fulfillment and living in a very unconscious, reactive way, right? So they can be used briefly to get some momentum for the growth space, but if you don't consciously transition into growth, you get stuck playing that whack-a-mole. It's exhausting living from this place. And this is often where addiction arises. And this is how diets and exercise, which seem healthy, they become dysfunctional. It's always just being used to meet these deficiency needs. If you're eating and exercising to gratify your self-esteem and to help you, impress others and do all these sorts of things, then a functional thing becomes very dysfunctional, and it just becomes this addiction that you're chasing because you get a certain satisfaction and then the motivation goes away. And then you want that motivation again, and it just becomes a very unhealthy, dysfunctional thing. So this is a big key, a big insight about this whole needs thing, is that many problems persist because they meet needs. If you're continually doing something you don't want to do, the fact is that it is meeting a need. And this is that knowledge and wisdom. Find out what is the pattern, what need is it meeting, and how can I realign myself so that I'm doing it from growth mode, and not from a place of lack and deficiency. So to dive deeper on these growth needs and figure out how we can get ourselves there, right, is they're achieved by facilitation. Right, so the best metaphor that I can think of to describe this is in the winter sports game curling. If you've ever seen it, they set the stone sliding in the direction of the goal. They don't touch the stone after that. There's actually like a team of them there that are they're like sweeping the floors in front of them. Right, so they're sweeping the floor and the environment around the stone to get it to move just at the right speed and in the right direction. They're attending to the environment around it to facilitate the natural momentum, and that's what we want to do. Right, is to within ourselves and our own lives is to facilitate natural momentum in the direction of growth instead of deficit. The way that you do this is by making the growth choice more attractive and less threatening, and to make the safer choice of deficit less attractive and more costly. Then that starts to create some unconscious momentum in that path. To get this right, you need to start small and be slow and deliberate. That's why it doesn't come naturally, it doesn't come automatically. It comes as an act of consciousness, right? It's an act of awareness and intention. As soon as you stop paying attention to the path, to the growth path, then it starts slipping away from you. So you have to be very intentional about your facilitation and cultivating those conditions. So in a nutshell, right, the deficiency mode is a sort of survival, avoiding pain. It works for a push start, but the motivation fades. Growth mode is about flourishing and pursuing joy, right? It builds lasting habits because the process itself is rewarding. If you want your efforts to last, you need to consciously direct yourself into this space through facilitation. To answer the question, why do I do what I do? Ask yourself not, what do I want? But what am I needing? More specifically, what needs are being unmet, which is therefore inevitably and unconsciously manipulating me into meeting it. If that was interesting, please give it a like, share it with someone you think would benefit from it, subscribe to the channel, and look around at the other videos. There's plenty to learn and grow with here. And until next time, my friends, be 100% human. Peace.